The Crucible Project is about turning up the heat, allowing that dross to come to the surface so that we all can become mirror reflections of Jesus. At the end of the day, it's that transformational work that says, Lord, I want to lean into you so that I can be more like you.
Welcome to the Crucible Project Podcast. The Crucible Project is a nonprofit organization committed to creating a world of men and women who live with integrity, grace, and courage, helping them to fulfill their God-given purpose. This podcast will discuss important and sometimes difficult topics while delivering practical life applications with men and women who are currently practicing this work. We are igniting Christ-like change in men and women through experiences of radical honesty and grace.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Crucible Project Podcast. My name is Andy Spell, and I'll be your interviewer today. I'm really excited today that we have Chris Cooper with us. And Chris, if you would, please tell us a little bit about yourself, about your family, what you do, and just give us a background of who you are.
Well, first off, thank you, Andy. I'm humbled and honored to be invited to spend some time with you and to the audience here. Yes, my name's Chris Cooper. Live here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I got here through a series of steps in my journey. I've been married for 30 years to my wife, Sharon. Some in the Crucible community know her. As well, we have a delightful 24-year-old daughter. Her name is Kayla. And both of them have gone through this kind of a weekend. So my wife went through Women Are Revealed, and then she participated in the Crucible Project, originating the Crucible Project for Women, and sat on the board of the Crucible Project as well as I did. And we can talk a little bit about that later. But live here in Charlotte, grew up in Chicago. Of course, spent a lot of time there, but I also traveled quite a bit extensively in business. And then furthermore, connected into more life mission impact transitional work, if you will, working with global nonprofits, which at that season of my life is when I experienced the Crucible Project back in 2009.
Wow. Okay. And where did you do your Crucible Project weekend?
I did my Crucible Project weekend up in Wisconsin in Williams Bay, which is,
okay.
I don't know if we still use that facility. It's a lot of memories and a lot of weekends served up there. But yes, up in Williams Bay, Wisconsin, 2009.
2009. And what do you currently do?
So I'm right now the chief ministry officer at a large church here in Charlotte, North Carolina, about 8,000 members at the church. So I report to the senior pastor, and all of the leaders, all the ministries, all the operations, the budgets, they all roll up to me. So I maintain and curate the vision, mission, and strategy of the church and provide leadership development and just really kind of hold everybody together in one accord. And of course, my heart is servant leadership. I told my senior pastor, I've got a great face for radio, so I don't need to be in front of everybody. I'm not gunning for your position. I know my lane. I don't need to be the senior pastor. I've got a pastoral heart, but I'm really behind the scenes in the support role and really enjoy that. We've got some incredible leaders, and we brought some great new leaders on board as well.
Chris, I don't know if you ever have people talk to you or ask you these questions, but I've been an associate, youth pastor associate, and worship pastor for years and years and years. And every once in a while, people out there will say, well, when are you going to get your church? And I'm always laughing. I'm in God's church. Like I'm doing exactly what I want to do.
Sure. Yeah. For me, I gave my life to the Lord when I was 20 years old in college, and the pastor of the town that I was going to school in, he went to a Bible college in Texas. And I knew that at some point in time, because of how deeply anchored my conversion was in coming to know Christ and all the other students around me, that I wanted to further my education after I got my undergrad. So I knew that I really had a heart for evangelism and missions and all of that. And as a result of that, I spent some time in ministry, but then I got back into the business world and spent 25 years in the business world. So I felt like I was incubating for a good 20, 25 years, and then flipped the switch and migrated back into more life mission ministry related work. So kind of a hybrid, I've got this pastoral ministry related heart, but I've got all this business background as well. So it was a unique conversion of just experience and as well, my background. And so, that was kind of my transition, if you will, into ministry.
Yeah. And man, I know that's got to be so beneficial for the church there and for the kingdom of God, especially, having those like-minded people to do all the different roles, because all those roles are needed and people need all of these. So I'm curious, what led you to going to your Crucible weekend?
Yeah, good question. So Andy, as I mentioned, I was in the business world and I was traveling quite extensively all throughout the U.S. in my role and responsibility. I worked with several large Fortune 500 companies. I grew teams. I was all responsible for bottom line revenue results. So it was like shareholder, stakeholder value, leading teams, closing business, all of that. And at the time, back in like 2007, 2006, there was an organization called Women Revealed. It was really for women. And so Debbie Holcomb and Linda Tonneson were leading that initiative along with Deb Poling, Judson's wife. And my wife went on a Women Revealed weekend. And I went to her initial graduation, and then she started to staff those weekends. And I started to go to those graduations. And my daughter at the time was a little infant. And so she'd have her little onesie and we'd carry her in her little car carrier into these graduations at night. And who was there? Nobody but Judson Poling and Mel Alger, because Mel's late wife, Jerry, Judson's wife, Deb, staffed those weekends. And my wife also staffed those weekends. So I went to a lot of those graduations. And both of those guys were really persistent in a polite way to say, you ought to consider going on a Dare to Soar weekend. Now, this is before Dare to Soar became Crucible Projects. So I said, I think I'm okay, and they just kept on being kind and polite, graduation after graduation. So in 2009, I said, you know what, I may want to check this out for myself and see what might be in it for me, not necessarily for my wife, but, just see what this could be for me. And so I had a window of time and it worked out well in my schedule. And I went on a weekend in the fall of 2009 and it was quite transformational for me. I kind of wish I'd done it 2 years prior when they first introduced it to me. But of course, that's the story for some of us. We get asked a couple of times and we say no, and then all of a sudden we go and it's like, wow, I should have done this before.
Yeah. So when you went on the weekend, did you know what you wanted?
Yeah. I think I was like a lot of men, I wanted to work on the relationship with my wife. All marriages, of course, have good challenges and difficult challenges. And so I went in thinking, I got to work on some areas of my relationship with my wife. And so I'm going to see what comes of it. But I will tell you, Andy, that the pre-work going into the weekend, as you know, anyone that goes on the weekend, they get a little packet of information where they do some self-assessment questions and then they interview a few people and kind of get a 360 about maybe what's going on in your life. And that pre-work really helped me kind of set up my mindset to say, okay, this weekend's going to be pretty interesting and I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I'm going to lean in. However, when I said I wanted to go in there to work on my relationship with my wife, I realized within a couple of hours that pivoted. I'm like, yeah, I do need to work on my relationship with my wife, but this is what I really need to work on. And so, Andy, I think that that was such a catalytic moment on the weekend for me that I said, okay, I'm going to really lean into this. Now, it created a little bit of fear, if I can say that honestly, because I'll just say it created some fear because I knew that where I was going to go was going to be a difficult space. And I can share briefly a little bit about what that was and what I worked on, because that provided really the transformational release and impact that really cut way below the surface, below the roots, the water source of what was feeding these messages that I was taking on in my life. And so I'll unpack that for a brief moment because I think it provides some really unique connection. So when I was 13 years old, I grew up Catholic. So I think I was a CME Catholic, Christmas, Mother's Day and Easter. That was about it. And so with that being said, at 13, you go through this confirmation process. Now, I've got a lot of brothers and sisters that are Catholic. I love them. They're great folks, nothing against Catholicism or anything like that. But in that season of my life, I went through the confirmation process, which you needed to have, for lack of a better term, like a mentor, a coach, someone to kind of walk you through the catechism of 8 or 10 weeks, if you will. And who should I pick? And so I thought, my next door neighbor across the street, he brings his family to church every Saturday because, Catholics go on Saturday and Sunday. Every Saturday was really a great model. And so I built up the courage to go across the street, knock on the door and ask my neighbor and said, would you be so kind? I'm going through the, confirmation process to be, my coach, my mentor, the one that can stand alongside me during the season. And you know what he said to me, Andy? He said, no, you got to be kidding me. No, you're not ready. No, I'm not going to do that, and close the door. So at 13 years old, the person that I looked up to that had this faith, strong faith as a man in the community, said that to me. And I walked back home really dejected and discouraged and thinking, I wanted to take a real step toward God here and needed someone to help me out. And he said, no, you got to be kidding me. You're not ready. So uniquely, My dad, my mom, great people, great inspiration, encouragers, both entrepreneurs, led businesses, grew businesses, started businesses, great model for me in a lot of ways. But that message from that next door neighbor that I looked up to kind of was a silver lining thread in my life, saying, when it came to whether it be leadership or stepping out and doing something, who you? You got to be kidding me. No, you're not ready. So
Yeah.
on that initial weekend, got a chance to address that and wrestled with God through those messages. And I'm telling you, the breakthrough that I got was really tangible, palpable, and transformational. And it was really freeing for me. And it never, at that point forward, really fed into my psyche, my ambition as a man, my confidence as a person going forward. It was like it was just the right cut off at the root source of the messaging. So that was my initial weekend.
I love that. And the beautiful thing is we as people, I don't realize how much power my words have.
Right.
And that gentleman, I can't imagine saying that to someone personally, but
yeah,
at times I've wondered, Chris, who have I wounded in a comment that I didn't know, hit them to the core.
Yeah. I think that we're all organized clay. Some of us are disorganized clay, and we don't know often the power of the words that we speak over one's life. I mean, I grew up in a family, in a household where, children are to be seen and not heard, and that may not be the case today in our culture, but, there are things that are passed on that can be wounding. Kids, as we know, have this exuberant, personality. They are free and all of that. And we can say things that are cutting, that can suppress, that can keep people from living authentic lives. And as a result of that, people are guarded and they are scared to maybe step out and do the things that they feel comfortable or confident doing, but they're feeling like they're going to get shut down. So yeah, words do matter, and words of affirmation do matter as well. So there's the flip side of the cutting down of somebody, suppressing somebody, but then also the building up of somebody as well. Yes.
So it sounds like God showed up in a way that you got to be taken back to this moment and do work around that. What else did God give you on that weekend?
Yeah. The unique thing is that after that weekend, I really felt like I really took on the challenge, being challenged as a man, wrestling with God and connecting with my masculine soul to say, there's got to be more. So I immediately enrolled into the 2-year program. So here it is. Greg was the leader of my 2-year program. There are other men that really poured into my life that I really appreciated. Of course, some of the men that I still do life with to this day. But Chris Mosher was a man that really was an impact in my life. Judson Poling, the list can go on and on. And I just got to say that going through the 2-year program helped me hone and shape even further. And the second level weekends were significantly impactful for me. So, with the Jerusalem Cross and going through the different weekends were challenging. There's a gentleman by the name of, Kurt Gustafson, who was in my 2-year program.
Man, I love Kurt. Yes.
Yeah. And Kurt challenged me on my leadership training. And the reason I'm dropping his name, because I need to, he said, Chris, I think that you're going a little too easy on your project. I did a project I remembered vividly that I wanted to survey and assess the Crucible community at that time to find out what gaps there were, what challenges there were, whether men were connected or not. And it seemed to be kind of an easy project, an easy thing for me. And he says, I think you're playing it safe. And so I leaned into that. I didn't like it, but I leaned into it. And so on my mission purpose weekend, which again, the whole steps after the Crucible Project going into the 2-year program continued that discipleship, that transformational work in my life, if you will, around being a healthier, more authentic man. He challenged me to the point where I started thinking about it. And I said, what is Chris Cooper all about? Who am I? What is the legacy impact I want to, leave in my life? Because that's part of what Greg really wants within the Crucible Project and the Dare to Soar, to find out who are you about and how are you going to leave a legacy impact in this generation or on this earth? Because it's not about playing it safe. It's about taking a risk. It's about leaning into who you authentically are. So what happened was on that mission purpose weekend, I dove in deeper. On that mission purpose weekend, I created my life mission statement, which I'm so grateful for because I've been able to live in it. And that is that I inspire people to invest in and experience the under-resourced world to shake global communities for Jesus. I want to live in my mission, and I've got a passion for missions, and I have this ability to raise funds and money, and I want to be able to see the kingdom impacted in under-resourced areas. So again, that life mission statement says, I inspire people to invest in and experience the under-resourced world to shake global communities for Jesus. And so I've been able to do some projects here in the U.S. and internationally, and I'm just floored by how God has moved through those.
Yeah. And so what was it about being able to tap into your power and your masculine soul to really believe that you did have something to offer and to be able to get rid of that negative voice? How did that help propel you? How did that help you get to this point?
Yeah. So I would say it took a great step of humility. And truth be told, I believe that before I went on this weekend, I had some insecurities around being around strong men and strong leaders and feeling like, I've been in leadership and I have been in some significant leadership roles. But when I would compare myself or think about others, I would say, there's still a lot of work I need to do as a man. And so when I own the reality that not only that I haven't arrived, but that I need to continue to find out more about what and how Chris Cooper ticks, and to strip off some of those layers and get to the core of who I am, that journey of humility, I think, helped to ground me. I mean, I would say things cutting to some people that were just inappropriate. I would railroad conversations. I would lack listening and feel like I needed to own the conversation. There were things that I realized that were not totally healthy about me, not toxic, but just not healthy. And so I went on this journey to say, I need to learn a little bit more about who I am as a person so that I can live in power, but at the same point in time, in compassion, empathy, with a sense of awareness of the plight of others. For instance, at one point in time, and I don't share this story very often, but, I spent some time in Africa and I came back. And this is when I was working for an organization in Dallas, working with 8 violent conflict countries in East and Central Africa. And I made an active choice, traveled back and forth between Chicago and Dallas because I was living in Dallas and my family was in Illinois. My wife at the time couldn't get a relocation from her company to move to Dallas, but I made an active decision to sleep on the floor for 3 months. And I did that to identify and connect with the plight of the under-resourced and the poor that don't have bedding, that don't have the resourcefulness to live in a space that I'm so much more comfortable and conveniently able to live in. And so as a result of that grounding, it caused a shift in me to now when I lead with servant leadership versus this top down. I'm here and you're there, so you got to listen to what I have to say because I'm the leader. No, I flipped the script on that and said, how can I serve? And in my service of leadership, I can support and maximize people's strengths and undergird their weaknesses. And that's how I live and that's how I operate now in my leadership, is by maximizing people's strengths of those that are on my team and undergirding their weaknesses and resourcing around them and serving and supporting them. Whereas right now, when we have our meetings, I choose to try to have the room configured like we're in a circle versus I'm at the hierarchy in the front of the room and they are like in a classroom. So we sit in a circle so we can see each other. We can honor each other. We can support one another. And no one feels like they're above one another. And it has brought some real refreshing. And I'm excited to see the fruit of how the teams are collaborating with one another versus operating in silos.
So there will be men and women listening to this podcast that have messages of insecurity that come on in their leadership. What were some of the messages of insecurity that you would hear before you did some work? And that's not that we get to, at least for me, I haven't gotten to the point where insecurities never bubble up again. So I haven't gotten rid of all insecurities. Yeah. Some situations come up, but what were some of the messages of insecurity that you would take on?
Yeah. So I think that a lot of times people are feeling like they may be inadequate in being able to do something because they haven't tried it. And so there's fear of I'm going to fail or fear that it's going to look bad if I try this. And so I look at failure as a gift sometimes where just by going for it, okay, you failed. That's all right. What did you learn from it? How would you tweak it to maybe adjust or change? There's something that we're doing right now as a church, which I really like. And, we're actually doing some unique things. As a big church with dozens and dozens, about 70 different ministries that are underneath the umbrella of what I lead. And what we are trying to do is we're trying to pivot and be more, how can I put it? Innovative. And so we want to stretch and find ways to do ministry. And that's going to take creativity, imagination. Right. And so some people are afraid to step into because maybe they're insecure. They're afraid to try something new or something different. And so we said, you know what? Why don't we try to do something that's at low to no cost? So we don't have to think that we got to spend a lot of money to try something, but what's something that we can do that's low to no cost? So what we did was I gathered all my leaders and all the lay leaders. We had hundreds of them in a room and we did a workshop and we said, what are the things? Think outside the box. Imagine, if you will. Okay. What ifs? Okay. And put it out there. So they started to talk in pods, meaning each of these ministries at round tables, and the room was buzzing. And so what they were doing, they were coming up with different ideas and they were just kind of sketching them out, like they were brainstorming and they were whiteboarding and they were thinking, hey, what if we did this? What if we did that? What we did was we said, okay, pick something that you want to do before Christmas, because this was back in the early fall. Okay, what are you going to do between now and Christmas? And then what do you want to do between now and Easter? So Easter's coming up in a couple of weeks. I'm going to, find out the results of what they put out there for what they're going to do between that mid to early fall to now before Easter. And the things that they came up with were incredible. So the key thing was this, is that the leaders needed to empower their lay leaders and their serving leaders within their ministries to take on some role of responsibility. Because think about it, in a church, you've got people that are members, but they may not be on staff, but they got gifts, talents, enablements, experience. Lean into them. Let them take on some leadership responsibility. Release yourself from feeling like you have to own all of it. And pour into your lay leaders, pour into those serving leaders, the members, and allow them to emerge, because out of that, they're going to be able to exhibit their passion, their experience, and who knows what's going to come of it. And I'm telling you, the things that they did between that point in time and Christmas were phenomenal. And they've got more things that they're going to do between the early part of the fall and Easter. So it's about leaning in and taking steps to identify what you are capable of doing, because many times people don't think that they really have the capacity to do more than what they think their limitations are. And so when you go out on a limb, it's like that bird. They got to trust that they're going to be able to fly from the first branch or the nest to the next branch. And when they do it, they realize, you know what, I can do this. And so when it comes to insecurities or challenges and roadblocks, it might be about leaning in. Now, if you're wounded, that's another situation. If you're traumatized, that can create some insecurity, and it's justifiable insecurity, but therein lies maybe the need for counseling to walk through. So I'm not saying it's easy peasy for any and everybody. Depending upon your life plight and the challenges of the experiences that you've had in life, it might require some counseling to get you unstuck. But if it's about, I just want to play it safe, and you've not been through any trauma or any challenge or whatever the case might be, it might be that you might need to just nudge yourself and connect with another person and say, I'm going to give this a try. Check back in with me and see how I'm doing, and ask me if I've accomplished my objectives. And you'll be surprised how far one can go to get through their own insecurities.
Man, I agree. And I think one of the things too is people are afraid of being embarrassed if they fail. And I want to work with our people just to say, man, it's no big deal. You went for it. I'm so proud of you. You stepped into it. We can learn from this. Some of the best things I've learned is those times that I felt like I was put on the spot, or things didn't go well, or something happened and it wasn't optimum. And I stopped and I looked at that. And a couple of times I've walked away, Chris, going, okay, I'll never do that again. I learned better. And the life lesson motivated me to do better.
Yeah. We've been talking a little bit here at our church about sharing testimony. And I have been reluctant to share testimony because sometimes it's like, I feel like if I share something, it's like it's going to fluff me up, or it's going to make me look better, or whatever it might be, when it's all God, right? And I'll give you an example that speaks to what you just said. I remember when I was in college, again, I gave my life to the Lord when I was 20 years. I was just a budding junior in college, between my sophomore and junior year. There was the mayor of our town that went to our church, and a great lady, a strong believer. but she had cancer. She had skin cancer, and it was all over underneath her eyes and on her face and her cheek. You can visibly see it. And she asked if the students at the school would come pray for her, because I was a part of a little renewal revival that took place on campus. So about 6 of us went over to her house and we prayed for her, and we prayed the prayer of faith. We were all on fire for Jesus, and we leaned in and we said, yeah, we're going to pray. So we lay hands on her and we prayed for her because she requested it. And so we went over there, and after we got done praying for her, we felt really good about praying for her, but that cancer was still there. It was still on her face and under her eyes. And we're like, well, we were obedient and we walked away. We still felt good. And we didn't know this, and we weren't embarrassed, but we could have been, because we were like believing that God was going to heal her right there in a moment, and a miracle was going to happen. But the next morning when she woke up, she cried out, and her husband who was in the other room, came back in, and what had happened was all the cancer had fallen off of her face and onto her pillowcase and the sheets. God miraculously healed her in the middle of the night, and she woke up, and God just got all the glory. And when she went into the office, everyone was like realizing she was all excited, and they looked at her and was like, wow, what had happened? She said, God had healed me. So oftentimes, there's a delay in our wondering, if we take steps, is it going to be embarrassing? Is it going to actually work out? Is it going to be too risky? And oftentimes, I think we're limited by our own visible and physical and cultural barriers and what people are thinking and the optics. And I just say that if you're anchored in Christ, it's okay. You might get embarrassed, or you might feel embarrassed, but you know what? If I'm going to be a fool for anybody, it'll be for Christ.
Right.
And so I just say lean in and be willing to allow God to transform you, because when experiences like that happen, you can't unsee what took place, and it only emboldens your faith and charges you to go forward with all the more vigor.
Absolutely. And I think the enemy likes to tell us what we aren't, and we've got to remember that Jesus is sitting there telling us who we are.
Yeah.
And living in that kind of faith.
Yeah. That's right.
So, man, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Chris. Is there anything that you would love to say to any men or women that are listening to this podcast today about why you believe a Crucible weekend might be beneficial for them?
Yeah. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, because it's at the epicenter of my heart, and it's even along the lines of my life mission statement. And I remember when I was in the 2-year program, and Greg Houston, the founder, had pulled me to the side, and he was a little verklempt, if I can be honest with you. And he said, I did a lot of inner city ministry, and, Greg's a white guy, and, his wife, Terry, I mean, they're a beautiful couple. And he said, Chris, I've done a lot of urban ministry, and the Crucible Project, now that it's gone from Dare to Soar to the Crucible Project, I really want to see something like this happen in the inner city, because there's a cost to this weekend, and there's a lot of men that live in urban settings that may not have the resourcefulness to afford a weekend like this, but there's change and transformation available for everybody that goes through this weekend. And so we pioneered the urban weekend in Chicago, about, 14, 15 years ago. And, Phil Jackson and Terrence Foster, Mikkel Harris, Tony Bradburn, we got a chance to pioneer something to where now over 400 men in the urban setting have gone through the weekend. And it's just been so impactful, even to the point where we did, there was a crucible on the inside, and I know Michael Bird and others had been around, getting that kicked off, and how
and the inside means in prison, right? The inside means in prison.
Yes, physically in prison scenarios, giving men in prison the opportunity to experience this kind of transformational work around their soul. And I think that as the Crucible Project continues to advance forward, it is meant for everybody. I will say this, there was a man that went on an urban weekend right now, and I'm name dropping because I felt like, I wanted to honor these testimonies of these men who've been impacted beyond the Chicago Crucible Project and all the dozens and dozens, hundreds of men and families that have been impacted. There's a man by the name of Jason Wilson who lives in Detroit. He came down to an urban weekend, and he's written a couple of books, Cry Like a Man, Battle Cry, and the latest book is The Man the Moment Demands. And I staffed a weekend in Rwanda. And when I staffed that weekend in Rwanda, there was a man from the DC area that had learned about the Crucible Weekend through one of his books. And he says, I'm going to check this out. So he looked on the website and decided to do a weekend. And he said, you know what? I'm going to do this weekend in the motherland. I'm going to go back to Africa and experience this Crucible Project, because what Jason says in his book, I need to experience, but why not go to Rwanda to do it? So he did. And I met him there, and he had an incredible experience. But the unique thing is that what Jason is doing and how he's bringing, through the power of his testimony, the work that he's doing in Detroit, and the fruit, the wisdom, and the insights that he has in his books has been really phenomenal. And there's a lot of men that have been impacted by the weekend. And I just want to encourage men who have gone on this weekend to stay persistent. Women who have experienced this weekend to stay persistent in reaching out to your friends, to those who you may or may not know what's going on in the basement of their life, but this weekend will bubble that up to the surface. And when they see and experience and participate in another person's work, it's going to continue to do refining things in their life. The Crucible Project is about turning up the heat, allowing that dross to come to the surface so that we all can become mirror reflections of Jesus. I mean, at the end of the day, it's that transformational work that says, Lord, I want to lean into you so that I can be more like you. And that's what's beautiful about the Crucible Project. And I'm looking forward. I mean, I'm staffing in a couple of weeks here in North Carolina, and continue to invite men and continue to staff. So I say, when you get the line in the water, keep it in the water. If you've yet to staff, I encourage you to staff. If you've staffed a long time ago and haven't staffed in a while, jump on board, invite some men, invite some women. It's incredible. And I just continue to promote it. And Andy, I'm just honored to say that for you to invite me to this podcast is great, and I appreciate it. And I'm honored to support the Crucible Project and to promote it.
Chris, man, I love it. And guys, men and women, I actually got to interview Jason Wilson. So if you've heard this from Chris, go back one of our episodes as Jason Wilson, and it's really good. So he's an amazing man. Chris, thank you. God bless you.
Yeah.
Man, I can't wait to hear from you again, and maybe we'll get to staff together someday.
I'd love it. That'd be great. Say hello to all your friends down there in Texas that know me.
I will. Thank you.
Okay. Blessings.